I know, this review is practically an entire week late, but nothing that huge is coming out this weekend except for maybe Jersey Boys, but I don't think you guys want to hear me talk about that. And I figured we had two big sequels come out last week, and out of the two of them, 22 Jump Street was the one that I was able to watch first, so I got that review out of the way and I decided to post it on that weekend. So I said to myself, since nothing that big is coming out next weekend, I figured if I managed to catch the other movie that I didn't get to watch before the weekend was over, I'm gonna go ahead and release that review in the preceding weekend. So here we go. And this one's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt because here I am to talk about what, in my opinion, was one of my most anticipated sequels for the summer, How to Train Your Dragon 2. I know it sounds kind of funny, but the reason for that is because I loved the first movie that came out back in 2010. It was a huge surprise knowing that this was adapted from a small children's book in the similar vein to Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, because it was a book that didn't really have that much of a story, but then they went ahead and adapted this narrative of a story out of it and were able to concoct a really good movie out of it. So I was very surprised by How to Train Your Dragon, and I loved it. There were so many aspects about the movie that I loved, and the decisions that they made with that movie. And so I was very geared up for. This was loud. Wow, wow. Okay, I was very geared up for How to Train Your Dragon 2. And you got the returning cast playing their characters, and once again we got Hiccup and his dragon Toothless, who embark on a brand new adventure that takes darker turns than the original. Because I gotta be honest, I can't go too much into detail with the story for this movie. All I'm gonna say is that there's this bad guy named Drago Bloodthirst Bloodfist Khal Drogo. I kept wanting to say Khal Drogo whenever his name was mentioned, but there's this big bad guy out there that's developing this army of dragons, and is planning to use this army of dragons to practically take over the world. And so Hiccup and Toothless embark on a journey to stop him and to find a way to convince him that dragons and humans can coexist and peace and harmony can be throughout the world and all that. And like I said, I can't get into too much detail because I remember hearing that one, if not both, of the newest trailers for this movie that came out had some spoilers in them, and I avoided them at all costs. In fact, I went into this movie both fresh and not fresh at the same time, because the only piece of marketing that I saw for this movie was that very first trailer that just shows Hiccup and Toothless flying through the air and doing all these crazy maneuvers, and that's practically it for the trailer. It's literally just a teaser. Other than that, I did not watch a single thing, so I was fresh in that sense, but I was also not fresh because I have seen the first one, so I had my certain level of expectations going into the movie. And coming out of it, I can honestly say, unfortunately, that this is probably the biggest disappointment of the summer for me. Now, don't misunderstand that for this being a bad movie. This is actually a kind of good movie, but kinda, and I'll get to that in a second. But aside from that, it is a well-made animated movie, because one thing that I feel is very consistent from the beginning of the movie to the end would be the animation. The animation is beautiful in this movie, and the cinematography for said animation is just outstanding. There's so many shots where I'm like, holy wow, this is breathtaking. And the 3D does a bit of a service to that animation, because I said to myself, I'm going to see this in 3D. Because it's an animated movie and it's a computer animated movie. So those generally tend to actually do very well, not necessarily commercially, but critically well when it comes to the 3D, because the fact they're animated movies, they're able to take things and make them pop out, and at the same time give the movie a bigger sense of depth because of the fact that it's animated. They're able to tamper with the things even after they have already created them. They can go back and be like, okay, I want to move this closer to the camera and this farther, and therefore give a good sense of depth of field when it comes to the 3D. Something that you can't really do with live action movies after you have already filmed them and you're post converting them. And you also got other aspects about the movie that, like I said, are good and consistent throughout the movie, such as the voice work from the cast, whether it be returning or new characters and new voice talents behind those characters, as well as some cool action sequences and really well choreographed flight sequences where you just can't help but be mesmerized by all these dragons that are just wishing about and they're just flying, and some of the camera work that they use to be able to illustrate the aerodynamicy of all these dragons flying everywhere. It's awesome. And the one thing that I could not have done without going into the sequel would have to be John Powell returning to compose the music, because I've said this before to some people that I know, the score for How to Train Your Dragon is one of my favorite scores of all time. It was nominated for an Academy Award, and rightfully so, because I can listen to so many songs from that score over and over, and I love it. And I'm glad to hear that How to Train Your Dragon theme when the DreamWorks logo shows up. Although I find it kind of... Did the rights go to 20th Century Fox? Because 20th Century Fox's logo appears first, so that kind of baffled me. But still, I got chills hearing that very epic... that epic theme from How to Train Your Dragon, composed by John Powell, return in this movie. Now maybe you're noticing that most of the things that are consistent throughout the film are mostly technical things. Where the movie kind of fails would have to be the writing, because I feel that the movie is separated by an event right in the middle. And you guys have heard me say before that as long as the second half is the better half of the movie, then at least the movie ended on a high note. But unfortunately, in this particular case, it is the first half that is far more interesting than the second half, because in that first half, you have so many interesting ideas that the movie plays around with that I was very intrigued by. First of all, you got Hiccup, who's got all of these neat little gadgets on him that made him a very badass character in this movie. And he did so many things with some of the things that he was able to build that he was practically like the Viking version of Leonardo da Vinci. And I'm not talking about Leonardo da Vinci who painted the Mona Lisa and all that. I'm talking about Leonardo da Vinci from Assassin's Creed 2, who was able to build all these really badass gadgetry, and Hiccup does so in this movie to the point where he makes it makes him more of a likable character, because in the first one, he was dealing with all those issues that are not necessarily bad, but the movie relied more on that rather than his creativity and ingenuity, and we see more of that in this movie. And I just couldn't help but be amazed by some of the things that he was able to build to be able to fly on his, or more so glide, or like Woody would say, fall with style, without the need of Toothless being around. And I found that very interesting, and not just with him, but on the subject of Toothless and the rest of the dragons, there were interesting things about these dragons. First of all, the design for some of the new dragons that they introduced in this movie are just breathtaking, especially one that is ginormous. It's when you see this thing, I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to see this thing in action. And we do see it in action for a brief amount of time, but that was rather epic in scope. And like I said, I really did enjoy all the neat designs that they had for the different kind of dragons in this movie. But along with that, they also introduced the fact that there's certain things that not only humans, but dragons themselves don't know about dragons. Like, somebody says, look what this dragon can do, and the dragon literally goes, I didn't know I could do that. So it's nice that the movie introduces new facets and new mysteries about the dragons that we have never seen before that were genuinely interesting. And along with that, you got the introduction of other characters that really did add a new dynamic to the story. One in particular, I can't reveal who this person is because I feel like that would be a bit of a spoiler, and I think that the less you know about this person going into the movie, then the better. And sadly, this person is shown in the trailers from what I remember seeing after I haven't seen the movie. But for spoiler's sake, I'm not going to say who it is. But this character being introduced in this movie add more layers to the story and more layers to some of the characters that were surrounding this other character. So I really enjoyed that. And then you got the main bad guy, Drago, whatever his freaking name is, Count Drogo. He even had dreadlocks and everything. But he was interesting in that first half because there was this backstory to him and you didn't know what he was all about. And then when you first see him being introduced into the main story, he's very interesting because he's kind of like Hiccup, but he's more of a sadistic version of him because he practically does the exact same thing that Hiccup does, only in a much more sadistic, evil, and antagonizing manner. It isn't until a tragic event happens in the movie, halfway through, that the movie just becomes routine as hell. I'm like, what happened? It's like it just lost all fire, pun intended there, and it just became a bit of a routine animated movie. Because not only does this tragic event take a turn that was kind of routine, I mean, it was supposed to be this tragic event, and yet I was there in the theater feeling kind of bad, not because of the tragic event that just happened, but because I'm literally not feeling any sense of emotion to this event. I'm sitting there going, I don't feel anything. And it's mostly due to the direction that they took with that tragic event. If they had taken a different direction that I would have wanted, then I would have felt something. But instead, they took it in a way where I'm like, you had this other opportunity. Why didn't you take it? And that would have been way more emotional. But instead, you went with this, and now I don't feel anything. And it is after this where, like I said, the movie becomes routine. Certain characters switch sides for no apparent well, I wouldn't say no apparent reason, but it was just in the blink of an eye. Like, instantly they're, like, you know, who was bad is now good, and who's good is now bad, and I'm like, okay. Just because the story demands it to be so, you're just gonna have these characters switch. And you got, your bad guy is now just a routine bad guy that just yells and says, after them! After them! And no sense of intrigue is in this character whatsoever, like we had at the beginning of the movie, as well as this other character that got introduced. This person is just there. The characters that returned from the first movie, they're just there. And so the movie just ends with a very routine style to it. And I felt very disappointed by the fact that the movie ended similarly to how the first one did. It kind of reminded me of Star Trek Into Darkness, to where they could have ended it in a way to make us go, wow, that just happened. But instead it went for a way, an ending that felt very much like the first movie. I've read some people say online in their reviews that this is the best sequel of the summer, or one of the best sequels of the summer. Some people were calling it the Empire Strikes Back of animated movies. You know what The Empire Strikes Back had in it? Was the feeling that the Empire struck back. I did not get that feeling by the end of this movie. The credits started rolling and I was still waiting in my seat going, something's gonna happen, right? I mean, here's a fine analogy. In that fun, and I don't know if, I'm just gonna say it. Spoilers for Empire Strikes Back if you have dared to commit the sin of not having ever seen The Empire Strikes Back. So, and trust me, there are some people that have not done so, but I'm just putting it out there. Spoilers for Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. But in the last scene of that movie, even the characters in that scene literally had that look on their face and that emotion on their face, like, we're fucked. Okay? I don't feel any sense of hope. And we got a good feeling out of that by the end of that movie, because things were so drastic, and we're wondering to ourselves, how are our characters gonna come out on top after this? Han Solo gets frozen in carbonite. Vader's Luke's father. Where do we go from here? And I guess what hurts the most about that is that I saw little windows of opportunity in that latter half of the movie where they could have done something like that. There's moments where I'm like, if you had written it this way, we could have had a very Empire Strikes Back type feel to the ending of this movie, leading to what's more than likely going to be the third movie. Because from what I hear, the director of this movie didn't want to do it unless he was able to turn it into a trilogy. And mind you, this movie is not directed nor written by Chris Sanders, who co-wrote and co-directed the first one. Chris Sanders is also the man behind Lilo and Stitch. So his absence is somewhat felt in the latter half of this movie. It's almost like he directed the first half along with this other director and then just left for the latter half. Because that latter half is just so routine that I just couldn't shake off the feeling of disappointment by the time I walked out of the theater. So in the end, I'm not going to say that How to Train Your Dragon 2 is simply just an okay movie. It's better than just okay. It is not only a kind of sort of good movie, but it is a well-made movie with beautiful animation that still holds up from beginning to end, and great cinematography in that animation, along with good voice work behind the main cast, as well as some really neat action sequences, especially whenever they show the dragons flying. And like I said, that first half of the movie is packed with so many interesting ideas that I thoroughly enjoyed. But it is after this tragic event in the midway point where the movie just becomes a routine animated film. And I will say that this is the kind of animated movie that parents can take their kids to go see, and the kids are just gonna love it the entire time, just like the kids in this theater. But parents will look at it and go and find interesting things sprinkled throughout here and there that will make them react with a simple, oh, that's interesting. Chuckle here and there. So with that, I will have to say that How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a 7 out of 10. It's a kind of high 7 out of 10, but it is a 7 out of 10 nonetheless. And despite passing as a good movie, it is nonetheless, due to my high expectations, one of the biggest disappointments, if not probably the biggest disappointment of the year so far. And I know, so far from what I can tell, I'm in the minority with this, but that's just my opinion. But let me know what your guys' opinion is, if you have seen the movie, and if not, will you catch it during this time that you're just building up anticipation for Transformers 4? Because I definitely know that you guys are. And thank you guys for watching. See you later.